Hello everyone. This video will be going over the AP Stylebook use of quotation marks. Now, quotation marks are really important for us as media writers to learn about because we use them often, whether we are citing what someone said or a document. We need quotation marks in order to use someone else's words within our piece. Now, the first mark within a quotation mark series is called an open quote, while the last mark is called a closed quote. So that will be helpful to remember as we learn about quotation marks in this video. Now, the most common use of quotation marks is through a direct quote. This is, again, when you're quoting a source or document directly, but it needs to be the exact words that the person or document says. If you're using it in a full sentence, you can put the attribution at the end, at the beginning, or even in the middle. But depending upon where you place it, your comma rules will change. So make sure you refer back to the comma lesson to know where to put those quotes. You can also see some examples here. If you're using a partial quote sentence, though, you want to make sure that you are not using commas and that, again, you are only using the direct words that a person or document says. A running quote is one that takes up more than one paragraph. If you're using full sentences, you will not use a close quote mark until the very end of the quote, even if it takes up multiple paragraphs. However, at every new paragraph, you will use an open quote mark. So here's an example. She said, "I really love Disney World." Then we start a new paragraph, but it's still the same quote. However, there are other places I love to travel as well. So here you can see we have two open quote marks, starting with "I really," and then on the second paragraph of the quote, we have "however." Notice we did not put a close mark at the end of the first paragraph where it says Disney World, because we're telling the reader that the quote is continuing even though we're starting a new paragraph. So this is important to remember because it denotes who is speaking. However, if the quote being used is not a full sentence, then you're going to use open and close quotation marks around each paragraph because you're denoting that the first sentence doesn't fully belong to the speaker. So she said she loves to, quote, "travel to other places," end quote. However, Disney World is my favorite place to go. Even though, however, Disney World is my favorite place to go is a second paragraph, because travel to other places is a partial quote, we would use closed quote marks at the end of it and start a new quote in the second paragraph. Partial quotes are quotes that only use certain parts of the phrase. It's when you're quoting something that is not a full sentence. Be sure that you are only quoting exact words, even when it's partial. You don't want to change someone's words as much as possible. You also want to avoid fragments if you could just rephrase it in your own words. So here's an example of a full sentence quote. Governor Kay Ivey says, "Don't give me a mountain oyster and tell me it's seafood." The rephrased partial quote could be if I change the pronouns. So where she says me, I'm going to replace her, but I'm going to do that in brackets to denote to the reader that I have changed a word without changing the meaning. Now, this is not the preferred style of quoting because, again, you want to use exact words whenever possible. However, sometimes you have to change pronouns or rephrase it just slightly in order for it to be a complete sentence. So this is the way you would do that. The governor discussed political corruption in her campaign ad, saying she doesn't want someone to give her a mountain oyster and tell her it's seafood. So you can see the pronoun change from the direct quote versus the rephrased partial quote. However, I could use fragments here, knowing that we need the term mountain oysters still in quotes because it's an important part of what she said. And if I rephrased it, it would kind of change the meaning. So here, the governor discussed political corruption in her campaign ad, saying voters should be wary of being promised seafood. That's really mountain oysters. So you can see here where I have not changed anything like pronouns. Instead, I've used partial quote fragments that are able to denote the meaning in a full sentence. Now, if these weren't such memorable terms, if I was just trying to partially quote someone, but the words that they used were not all that interesting, then I should probably not quote. I should just paraphrase what they said instead. So, by the way, if you're not familiar with what a mountain oyster is, it is actually bull testicles. So, yeah, you just keep that where it is. That is actually a quote from our state's governor. Another way that you would use quotation marks is in dialogue or conversation. If you are documenting a conversation outside of broken dialogue, which is where you denote who is speaking each time, each person needs their own quotation marks, even if what they're saying is short or brief. Will you go to Disney World? Not this year. When? Hopefully 2021. So you can see the conversation moves back and forth here in a dialogue. However, we're giving each phrase or sentence or question their own quotation marks in order to denote who is speaking when. If you're using a Q&A or broken dialogue format, then you don't use quotation marks. Instead, you will refer back to your colon rules, as I've shown here in this example. Another use for quotation marks in AP style, other than directly quoting someone or a document, is through composition titles. This is when you place quotation marks around the titles of books, movies, plays, poems, albums, songs, operas, radio and television programs, lectures, speeches, and works of art. Pretty much if you're composing something, creating something with words, you want to create quotation marks around the title of that thing. There are some exceptions to that. You will capitalize all the words in the title except for articles, prepositions that are 3 or fewer letters, and conjunctions that are 3 or fewer letters. The only exception to the exception is if an article, a preposition, or conjunction begins the title, then you will go ahead and capitalize it. So here are some examples. We have Gone with the Wind. You can see with is more than 3 letters, so we're going to capitalize it. The, however, is an article, so we'll put that in lowercase. So those are some examples with that. Meanwhile, we have The Godfather, but because the starts the title of this movie, we will make sure that it is capitalized. If the title of the work contains a phrasal verb, which is when a verb requires something else to make sense, you're going to capitalize both words, even if it falls into these exceptions. What to look for in a mate. Look for is a phrasal verb because they need to go together in order for look to make sense. And so therefore we would say what to look for in a mate. All of that would be capitalized. Composition titles, we don't use quotes for holy books such as the Bible, the Quran, the Torah. We also don't use quotation marks for reference materials such as dictionaries, or other types of journals or anthologies. Software titles, such as like Microsoft Word, we would not consider those compositions, nor do we consider apps or any type of game to be a composition. You're going to translate titles into English unless the title is widely known by its foreign name. An example of that would be the play Les Miserables, which is known for its French title. So we're not going to to translate that into English. But otherwise, you mostly want to use the English term for any composition titles. Other uses for quotation marks in AP style book to denote irony. So if you were speaking whatever you're writing and you are using air quotes to denote something, it's probably it's probably good to go ahead and use quotation marks in your writing because it's denoting that irony. Unfamiliar terms on first reference can sometimes need quotation marks. Just be very cautious because remember in AP style, we don't want to use unfamiliar terms without explaining them. Also, nicknames that are used inside of a name like Paul Bear Bryant or Dwayne The Rock Johnson, the nickname will go in quotation marks as well. So now that you know a little bit more about how to use the quotation marks within AP style, make sure you do the homework by Wednesday, September 30th. And then by Friday, you will need to have your peer interviews conducted and send the transcripts in by Friday at midnight. Your peer interview story draft is due on Monday, and make sure you send a copy both through Canvas to me, as well as email your fellow students so that they can do the peer edit draft. And then just know that there are no more lectures this week. You will be responsible for doing your AP review homework on Wednesday and Friday, but the rest of the time is going to be spent really working on this peer interview story. So hopefully that will give you a little more time for you to do those assignments. And don't forget, of course, you will have your current events quiz on Friday.